morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is week 10 of the Introduction to the Culture of the 19th Century, and today I'd like to talk with you about Victorian fashion and design. By design, I mean architecture and most of all the interior design. And if you would like to read more about it, there is a chapter in Sally Mitchell's book called The Material Substance of Private Life, House, Food and Clothes. And this is basically, I guess, where you can find the more basic information about the subjects that I'm going to cover today. There are also, of course, some interesting documentaries, and definitely the one I would like to recommend to you is a documentary by Lucy Worsley called If Walls Could Talk, The History of the Home. There are 4 episodes devoted to different areas inside private dwellings. So there is one episode on the bedroom and the living room and the kitchen and the bathroom. So it's not only about the 19th century, it more or less shows the development of these areas in private homes through history, so from more or less the Middle Ages to the present times. If you're interested, and especially if you'd like to write something more about it in your final essay, this is something that I can recommend to you. For the basic information, I would say Sally Mitchell's chapter. So, of course, as you can imagine, everything concerning this material substance of private life was dependent on social class and wealth. So there were still some aristocratic families who continued to live the life of country gentlemen and ladies. They had estates, and their way of life did not really change so much in the 19th century. On the other end of the scale, there were poor people living in the country who continued to live in small cottages with the furnishings and technologies practically unchanged for generations. So they did not profit from the Industrial Revolution so much. But if we take a look again at the dominant social class, that is the middle class living in the city, there are a lot of characteristic features and a lot of interesting aspects of private life and housing and domestic technologies that are typical for the 19th century and perhaps not so much recognizable nowadays. Because not only of the advancement of technologies like the introduction of electricity into the private homes, that did not happen in the 19th century. Electricity as a technology was discovered in the late 19th century, but it took a few more decades to enter into daily use by private homeowners. So throughout the 19th century, any technology that we have in private homes is not electric. It's I don't know, the mechanic like kitchen utensils, or sometimes gas fixtures for lighting. But then again, the majority of people still, for example, in case of lighting, used the candles or the oil lamps of different or kerosene lamps of different description. So going back to the middle class ideal home in the 19th century, especially the second half of the 19th century, they lived in city houses that ideally, of course, were rather spacious. Sally Mitchell writes somewhere that an average comfortable house for a family with children would consist of around 10 rooms. They weren't very big and they were usually rather narrow with several stories. So these are not large houses, but rather tall houses, usually in the rows, so the streets, or even more ideally situated next to a square. You can still see such arrangements in London in some places, where the little square in the middle has like a fenced garden, and the inhabitants of the houses around the square have the private key to the fence, and they can use the garden in the square, but the strangers, the people from outside, are not admitted. This was perhaps the best location in the city in the 19th century, and as I said, the houses were narrow because land was expensive basically, but several stories tall. So the division of space within such a house was more or less standardized. For example, the kitchen was almost always in the basement. The basement was not very low, not very deep, but so it could have relatively full size of the room. It was as high as other rooms in the house. Also, it had full-scale windows, so like half of the basement was below the street level. There was very often a separate entrance for all the delivery men from shops. We'll talk about shopping in a little while, but generally these houses operated on delivery system. So you would have like foodstuffs and some other purchases delivered to your door by the delivery men from specialized shops. And they would normally deliver through the kitchen door, that is the door at the basement level. The main entrance to the house was a few steps up to the front door. Then there was the first floor, or the ground floor, as it was normally called in Britain. They have the ground floor, the first floor, and then the second floor. On the ground floor, let's start with the kitchen. Why the kitchen was in the basement? The reason is quite simple. This was the only place where you could get running water. The water pressure in the pipes, and there was piped water in the cities, but the pressure was not very high, so that the water would not reach higher floors. That is why most of these houses, until the very last decades of the 19th century, do not have a fitted bathroom with running water, because the pressure in the water pipes did not allow it. I'll tell you how they washed and what they did instead of, let's say, having a fitted bathroom. But the kitchen, of course, operates better when you have access to the water supply. So it was set in the kitchen. Sometimes, if the if the house was big, there might be other rooms like the pantry for storing food, the scullery. You remember the scullery maids, I hope. So the small room with the water supply next to the kitchen for washing things, for doing the laundry as well. This was quite a tiresome and complicated job. Sometimes in bigger houses there might be a small sitting room in the basement for the servants. This is where they would rest during the infrequent times during the day when they could rest for a moment. This is where they would take their meals. The servants' quarters, so the bedrooms for the servants, were on the top floor, called the attics or the garret. The highest place with the most stairs to climb, usually very simple and Spartan places for the servants to sleep. Sometimes there was a small room next to the kitchen, but usually it was on the top floor. So this leaves us with the ground floor, the first floor and the second floor. The ground floor was on the floor with the entrance, with the front entrance to the house. So there was the entrance hall where the guests were admitted. And usually the other rooms were a dining room for dinners, especially dinners for guests, and a room set aside for the men of the house, usually called the study or the office. A characteristic thing for 19th century homes is that there is a clear distinction between female spaces and male spaces. So some of the rooms are more masculine in their function and also in their decoration, and some of the rooms are more feminine in their function and decoration. The study and the dining room were male spaces. This was the place where the man could have some peace and quiet if he was working, for example, as a doctor or a lawyer. He might even accept clients or patients in his study. Otherwise it might serve as a library or a place for a man to pursue his hobbies, to read, to smoke tobacco. Of course, we are not talking about very wealthy household, because in such households you would have specialized areas for everything. This is also something very typical for 19th century house design. Specialized areas, if you could afford them, if you could afford a special room only to eat breakfast in, if you could afford a little studio for your hobbies, if you liked, I don't know, painting or photography or any other craft, you might have a special studio room for that. If not, the kind of minimal, respectable, middle-class home would have the dining room and the office next to the entrance hall. What do I mean by masculine design and decoration? So the use of things like dark wood and leather, for example, for upholstered chairs. This was usually connected with more serious, business-like appeal and more connected to the men's world, according to the Victorian division of spheres. So the places where men could socialize with other men, like business associates or clients mostly. From the entrance hall, a broad stairway led up to the first floor, which was, I would say, the most prestigious area in the home in terms of decoration and entertaining. This is where the most elegant rooms were set. Sometimes a few of them connected by folding doors or archways. Sometimes if the room was small, this might be just one or two rooms used for entertaining guests. So other, let's say, forms of entertaining guests than eating meals. Eating meals would be done in the dining room on the ground floor, but when the guests entered, they would be led up the stairs to the drawing room. The drawing room was like the living room now. So the place where you would have soft furniture and decorations, and it was usually quite cluttered. This is also something typical for the Victorian interior design. You do not have really the symmetry and the simplicity that was quite typical for earlier design styles, like in the 18th century. You have a lot of furniture, a lot of upholstered furniture. This is something very new and modern. The armchairs and sofas with springs inside that would make for more comfortable sitting. The drawing room was called not really because people would draw pictures there. They might if they like to, but because of the practice of withdrawing. That is moving away from the dinner table to rest in this elegant salon, and then return to the to the dinner table for desserts. So the drawing room was a feminine space. So it would be lighter in the color scheme. It might very often have wallpaper with floral designs or other colorful designs on the wall. It would be decorated with pictures and embroidery frames and musical instruments and such things. And of course, this is where you would have all this soft furniture that was also associated with women. So if there was a table, it would normally be as a round table for the lady to serve tea to her female guests, or to entertain them by, I don't know, showing them some interesting objects from her collection, or photographs, or other artwork around the table. The table would also serve as a kind of workspace for the lady of the house. Very often she would use it for writing, for correspondence, and such things. Men normally had separate desks for work. Women sometimes did that as well, but in majority of Victorian households they would just have a writing box, so like a box with a slanted lid, and they would put this box on the drawing room table and write letters or work in any other way that they preferred. Once again, these were highly decorative spaces. If the family was wealthy, they might have a music room there, an art gallery with some sculptures or figures or paintings, a conservatory with plants. House plants were very popular. If they had, for example, a caged bird, the bird cage would also be situated in the drawing room. So when guests came to the house, they were first showed upstairs to the drawing room. The hostess would welcome them at the top of the stairs, and later, when there was time for dinner, the guests would go down the stairs to the ground floor. There were all kinds of little social customs connected with that. Like, for example, it was very gentlemanly for men to accompany the ladies going down the stairs, perhaps even hold their hands in case they tripped on the stairs with all those bulky Victorian skirts. We'll talk about the clothes in a little moment. Then there were some more floors above the drawing room. So these floors were used for family bedrooms. Depending on the size of the house, there might be 1 or 2 floors of family bedrooms. Of course, the master bedroom would be the biggest, the one used by the lady and the master of the house. Sometimes it might have adjacent dressing rooms, sometimes even 2 of them, one for the lady and one for the gentleman. When fitted bathrooms became available, technically this is where they would be installed. Before that, people normally washed in their bedrooms after they got up, but they didn't really take a bath. They used wash stands with the water, heated water, brought up from the kitchen level by the servants. So they would have a jug and a bowl of water where they would basically strip to the waist at least and wash themselves daily. And then discard the used water into a kind of pail that then would be taken away by the servants. So the servants were quite important here. Nobody expected the family members to empty their own piles of used water, or even the chamber pots. The fitted toilets were also a novelty. Not all houses have fitted toilets in the 19th century. Very many houses, even used by the middle class, would still have the toilet outside. So it would be used during the day by everybody, including the servants. But at night, if you needed to go, you would use a chamber pot. And then you would cover it with a lid and either call for a servant to take it out or wait until the morning for the servant to take it out. So yes, nobody expected the lady of the house or the master or even the children of the family to carry their chamber pots themselves. This was also left to the servants. Then there were the bedrooms for the children, very much depending on the age of the children and the gender of the children. Usually small children shared the room with their siblings regardless of their sex. From the age of 8 or so, sisters shared the room together and brothers shared the room together. There was no mixing of the sexes in the bedrooms. The rooms for children were usually called a nursery. So a night nursery was a bedroom for the children. Younger children might be accompanied by a nursemaid, so a servant who was employed to look after them. A day nursery was like a sitting room for the children when they were old enough. This is where they would also get their instruction from a tutor or governess. Then such a day nursery might be also called a schoolroom. So, and the top floor is for the servants' bedrooms. So that's more or less it. If you want more, I recommend you watch the documentary by Lucy Worsley, If Walls Could Talk. This will tell you, I hope, something more, and you'll actually show the designs and the fittings of the houses in the Victorian period, and we continue in a moment.